Hello, y'all, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dells. We're here after Thursday Night Football, a game that we anticipated would be very low scoring. We got the complete opposite. Well, I should say we got that from one team. The Las Vegas Raiders absolutely stomp out the Los Angeles Chargers. 63-21. Mr. Dells, before we get into this football game and our starts of the week, our sits of the week, because gentlemen and ladies too, if you're tuning in, it's playoff time.
Yes,
It's
sir.
that time of the year where all your hard work comes into fruition and hopefully you see out your championship aspirations. To those that did not make the fantasy playoffs, our condolences are with you. We hope that you are still watching and enjoying this content, kind of just let me not say not reminiscing. What's the word I'm looking for? You're just, you need some fantasy content. We're here to help you out. So we apologize that you can't enjoy these times. But before that, Mr. Dells, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing good. And just listen, just because you're out of the fantasy playoffs doesn't mean watching the show isn't important, right? This last month of the season, going into next year, you never know what could happen. Maybe you get some rookies take over some backfields, right? The receiver position, quarterbacks. There's always something to be learned, even if you're not in the fantasy playoffs. But I'm doing good, Drew. We had some game here, 63-21. I'm looking at my phone every second because I'm waiting for that sleeper notification saying Brandon Staley, he's been relieved of his duties as Chargers head coach, because it feels like after every Chargers L, it's like, okay, this is the one. This is the one. This is the one for Staley to get fired. And 63 points to the Las Vegas Raiders, who just put up a goose egg the week before, 0 on a short week. Go and put up 63 on your defense. This feels like the absolute bottom of the bottom for Chargers fans. If it wasn't, I felt like once Herbert got ruled out, it's like, this is the worst thing that could happen. You know, Herbert's done. Keenan Allen didn't play in this game. I feel like this is the worst part of the Chargers season. And then they go and put 63 on you. Oh my God. We have a lot to talk about. Because I was expecting the same thing. I was like, this is probably gonna be a boring 13-10 type finish. But what a game we got.
So for those that are asking about our Patreon episode, we recorded our Patreon episode earlier today. Should be out later tonight, if not tomorrow morning at the absolute latest. Thank God we all decided that the Raiders were going to win this game, and none of us look stupid. I know you guys were thinking that Riv would be the one to vibes pick, going with the Chargers. Easton Stick, he showed me something. No, he had a head on his shoulders this time around, and he actually picked correctly. So this game was interesting because you're 100% right. Brandon Staley's done. I had half a mind to make this episode titled Brandon Staley is fired, because that's the inevitable. You're a defensive-minded head coach, and you allow over 50 points to be scored on your defense. It's unacceptable. It can't happen. So, yeah, 1,000% Brandon Staley is fired after this game. And some strong takeaways. Davante Adams, we have some life. Almost goes for 100 yards. I think he just got 94 yards.
He got 101.
He did get 101 on that last drive. That's huge. Yes, because he had that 7-yard catch. You're 100% right. So 8 catches, 12 targets, 101 yards. I appreciate that. And did get a touchdown pass from Jakobi Meyers. Jakobi had a receiving touchdown. He also had a throwing touchdown. They showed it off a little earlier in the game where Jakobi had a pass to Davante Adams just for the first down, and then they run the same trick play that ends up getting Davante in the end zone.
42-0. Like Antonio Pierce was like, I don't care what you're gonna say. I was like, damn, that's rude.
I think Antonio Pierce has a job that he's trying to keep for next season. And when you put up 63 points, I mean, you make yourself a great case to be the head coach for the team next season, because we saw in years past when we thought that the special teams coach that took over for Gruden, I'm blanking on his name off the top of my head right now. Bisaccia, thank you very much. Rich Bisaccia. We thought that he would be the one to keep his job, and then he was the one that ended up not keeping the job. They moved on for Josh McDaniel. That obviously did not come into fruition. That was a bad move. But here Antonio Pierce is, and he's doing himself a pretty fine job, even though last week wasn't the greatest. But this is how you bounce back. 63 points. Aiden O'Connell didn't look too bad himself either. Made some nice throws. Zamir White gets into the end zone. We spoke about it on Sunday. What was it, Sunday, or were we talking about it on on the actual podcast. One of the two. I know Zamir White actually got brought up into conversation because I was joking about how he was the number one recruit coming out of high school. So Zamir has some talent. It's always been the injuries that have gone against him. Was healthy in Georgia, of course, and then he's backing up Josh Jacobs, one of the best running backs in football. So when he gets his time to shine and he goes for 69 and a touchdown, not too bad. But I think there's really, what else is there to say other than this was a severe ass kicking. So let's move on to the good part of the show, the starts and the sit. Now we'll get this out the way early because it's playoff time. We want you guys that if you guys are tuning in, we're trying to cater this episode to you guys. Ask your questions in the chat. We will go over a majority of them, if not all of them. But if you guys are tuning in, make sure to drop a like on this video. Helps us out a lot. If you aren't already subscribed to the channel, come on. What are you doing? Subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you know when we go live, like nights like tonight. And, of course, when we go live for the Pick a Side podcast, Riv Academy, and Joel Moran show. Now, without further ado, let's get into the bulk of the show. Mr. Dells, talk to me. Your Week 15 playoff start of the week.
We have a super chat up here, and it goes perfectly with my quarterback start of the week. Our guy Aiden's asking, with Herbert out, do I start Sam Howell or Jay Love? My quarterback start of the week this week is going to be Sam Howell. I know what your quarterback start of the week is going to be too, so we're going to get a little duo here. Sam Howell's been, just one of the best picks in all of fantasy football. QB6 on the year, dating back to week 5. His fantasy finishes QB5, QB8, bad week, QB23. Bounces back with a QB1 overall finish, QB10, 4, 10, 10, 9. 7 out of 8 weeks, he's finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. And the craziest part about this is if I'm telling you in September, Sam Howell is QB6 on the year, and I say, just guess what the wide receivers on Washington are. You got Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 34, Dotson 46, and Curtis Samuel, wide receiver 43. Maybe someone has the archives out there, but I can't remember a quarterback being this high in fantasy football. And basically all the receivers are not startable. In one of our leagues, Terry McLaurin was on the waiver wire. Like, I saw someone pick up Terry McLaurin a week ago because he's been just like around 8 to 9 points every single week. So it's kind of alarming how these wide receivers haven't been able to get involved. But you look up at this matchup this week too, going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Lamar went for nearly 400 total yards and 3 touchdowns. The week before, Joe Flacco's first game off the couch, 250-2. Kyler had nearly 20 fantasy points against them. But more than anything, this Washington defense is terrible. And the Rams offense can be able to put up points. Matthew Stafford is coming off a great game in Baltimore in the rain. Probably his best game of the season if you take into account everything else that's going on with the matchup and how great Cooper Kupp looked and Nakua and Kyron got involved. Probably overall his best game, going up against the top 3 defense in the league. Now he's going up against arguably, or maybe not even arguably, the worst defense, at least for fantasy football and quarterbacks in this Washington Commanders team. I love Sam Howell this week. So to answer your question, Aiden, I do think Jordan Love is a fine start week in and week out. I don't know what that just was.
Was that in your house and my house too?
I think it was. I don't think that was just mine because I saw it here too. Jordan Love's a solid start going up against Tampa Bay, but this matchup is fantasy gold, right? The Rams side and the Commanders side. I mean, we're going to be talking about some players, not just these quarterbacks, but I love Sam Howell this week.
Listen, and on the opposite side, you already spoke about it a little bit. So, I mean, it's to be expected. Matthew Stafford is going to help players go on to the next round, going up against the 32nd ranked defense in terms of points allowed to fantasy quarterbacks. And Matthew Stafford, these last 3 weeks, has been cooking with over 20 fantasy points in 3 straight weeks. And one of those weeks, like you mentioned, was against the Baltimore Ravens, who have been one of the better defenses in the league. And going up against Washington, I could have put every single player for the Rams as my start of the week. But to give some variety, of course, we have to do a job here. And I got to be a little bit more professional than I could have. It would have been easy because all these guys I anticipate are going to have themselves a baller-ass game. But it starts with Matthew Stafford, the quarterback of the Rams. He's going to go and have himself a field day. That's an obvious answer for me.
Yes, sir. So moving on to my sit. You know, a few weeks ago, it's probably a month ago at this point, I had a very spicy quarterback sit. It was Josh Allen against the Jets. That shot me in the foot. Bad look. Josh Allen went out there, put on a performance of the ages. I'm getting spicy again, though. I'm sitting Patrick Mahomes this week. If I would have told you September that Sam Howell is QB6, I'm telling you, start Sam Howell over Patrick Mahomes this week. I don't think you should feel any obligation to start Patrick Mahomes since week 8, which is what, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago at this point. He has one finish within the top 10. He was QB 30 against Denver, QB 12 against Miami, QB 15 against the Eagles, who have shown to be one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. Did have a solid performance against Vegas as QB 8, but then QB 16 and QB 20 these past 2 weeks going up against the Green Bay Packers and Buffalo Bills. This week, going up against the New England Patriots, you've kind of been hinting that this could be a trap game for Kansas City. While I don't think they'll lose this game, because I don't trust Bailey Zappi in this offense to be able to move the ball against Kansas City. But I'm with you in terms of New England being able to limit Kansas City's offense. I mean, if they're not able to move the ball consistently against Philly, who has shown to be terrible, like I mentioned, why should I have any faith in them going up against New England Patriots? This season, the Pats have only allowed 2 quarterbacks to throw for over 300 yards. Can you guess who those 2 quarterbacks are?
Patriots. Let's say Jalen Hurts.
No.
Wait, I'm sorry. Say it again. 300 passing against the Patriots, you're saying?
Yes.
This season.
This season.
Did Tua do it his second time around? I'm going to say Tua was one of them.
Tua was one.
And the other was, I don't know. Just tell me.
Sam Howell. 2 of your guys. Tua and Sam Howell were the only quarterbacks to throw for over 300 yards against New England Patriots. They've only allowed 2 or more passing touchdowns 3 times this season. Tua was one of them. Josh Allen was the other. I don't remember. Or those only 2 I said 2. And they're also one of the better teams against defending scrambling quarterbacks. They haven't played a ton, but they played Jalen Hurts week 1, only allowed 37 yards against Josh Allen. Even Zach Wilson earlier in the year, who does have some legs. They haven't really given up too many yards on the ground. So I don't think Patrick Mahomes is going to get a ton of success now, or at least in the rushing department. And this Chiefs offense, it's not what we're used to. Since week 6, they've scored over 21 points just twice, which came against the Chargers and Raiders. I know the Raiders defense has looked better as of recently, but 2 of the, worst defense in the league, at least at that time. It doesn't feel good, especially round 1 in the playoffs. You drafted Mahomes super high. If you're in a 2 quarterback league, he was probably a top 2 or 3 pick. If it was even a 1 quarterback league, it was probably in the second round. But I think you have to just forget about who the player is and just look at the production. The production hasn't been there. Like I said, I would happily start Sam Howell over him. I'm happily starting Matthew Stafford over him. Our quarterback starts of the week. But don't feel obligated just because it's Patrick Mahomes to put him in your lineup this week.
Let me tell you, Mr. Dels, that's music to my ears. And that's an absolute perfect sit because Mahomes, although we understand he's a great talent, all right, let's put all joking aside, the Patriots defense has been elite this season, and it hasn't getting spoken about because of the conversations around Bill Belichick and him not returning to the Patriots, and because they're not winning games because that offense is one of the worst we've seen in NFL history. It's pretty terrible. But the defense comes to play every single week. We're seeing a struggling Kansas City Chiefs offense, and unfortunately at the helm, Patrick Mahomes is there. So for my sit of the week, it's going to be where you have the guy who I don't like, not even a little bit, in your sit of the week. It's the guy who I love more than 99% of the league. Probably nobody else in the league I like as much as this guy, Tua Tagovailoa, going up against the New York Jets. Now, when they played last time, watching the game, real football, I felt as if Tua had himself a great game. But for fantasy football, when you're going up against the New York Jets, it's never a great matchup. Since their bye week, they've only allowed double digits 2 times. One of them was to the New York Giants. The other was to Josh Allen, who had himself an amazing ball game. And he's the only outside of Dak, who I think Dak game managed his way through the game. I look at Josh Allen and think that he was the one quarterback this whole season that looked comfortable against the New York Jets. And with Tua, who has his entire team, at least his entire offensive line, is going through injuries. They're probably going to be missing 3 of their 5 starters. Connor Williams out for the year. Robert Hunt he's probably going to be out this week. And Leon Eichenberg, who is filling in for Connor Williams, has not been practicing either. So it's very troubling times for the Miami Dolphins offense, and especially with Tua, who's going to try and make his presence known in the pocket. They're going to be getting pressure on him. He's going to be trying to get the ball out quickly. And the last time these two matched up, like I said, he had a good real-life game, but for fantasy football, he had under 8 points and threw 2 INTs. So to me, I would stay away from Tua. I know he's been one of those guys for you that has gotten you to the fantasy playoffs, but in this situation, I would try and find a pivot and see if I could find a better quarterback for the playoff matchup.
Yeah, especially if Tyreek Hill, we don't really know his status. He's probably going to play. It's Tyreek Hill. He doesn't really need a practice to play, but he still have DMPs back-to-back days. And if Tyreek Hill is out, 100% on board. If he is playing, you do feel a little bit more comfortable. But with that Jets defense, I'm right there with you. And we see all the comments in here.
Quick. I was going to say, here's one of them. Who would you start this week? Kyler, who's going up against San Fran, or Tua versus the Jets?
Kyler's floor feels a little bit safer with the rushing upside.
Okay. I agree.
Because I do think they're going to struggle. I'm starting Kyler this week. It's not my favorite matchup by any means, but Kyler could get his way to 40 or 50 rushing yards and get into a rushing touchdown. He doesn't have to have the greatest day through the air. He probably won't, but that rushing can save you. So I'd probably lean Kyler there.
I'm with you with Kyler Murray too, because when the Jets played the Dolphins the last time, Tyreek and Waddle both had over 100 yards. And like I said, Tua did not have himself a great fantasy day. I think with the rushing ability, the rushing upside with Kyler Murray, although he hasn't been the greatest of passers since returning from injury this season, I still think that you have to trust that rushing upside, and his floor just seems safer than Tua's at this point. Let's move on to RBs, brother.
Yeah. Let's move on to running backs, and we'll get to some of your context as well, or comments. Let's just run through these starts and sits, then we'll answer as many as we can. Moving on to running backs, start of the week. I'm going with DeAndre Swift. I think this is a name that a lot of people are probably 50-50 with this week. You know, these last few weeks hasn't been great for DeAndre Swift. Let's be honest, it hasn't been great for a lot of people on the Eagles offense. Swift got off to that red hot start, cooled down as the schedule toughened, and I think more than anything, it's just the Eagles these last few weeks have found themselves in deficits. It seems like, especially if you go back to last season, of course, Swift wasn't on the team, but they're up big almost every game. You see Miles Sanders be able to produce and put up numbers because since they're winning, they're able to run the ball. Now they're losing most of the time at the end of the first quarter, let alone halftime. And Swift hasn't been able to really get involved as much as we did, at least in the beginning of the season. This week, going up against the Seattle Seahawks, though, I'm right back in. Seattle has allowed the 5th most points to opposing running backs, including 14 rushing touchdowns on the season, which is second most in the NFL. They're going on 4 straight weeks of allowing at least 1 rushing touchdown. And CMC has inflated those stats a little bit, if I'm being 100% honest. But you could look at some middle-of-the-pack running backs. Royce Freeman, when Kyron was out, had success, averaging over 4 yards per carry. We saw Tony Pollard get in the end zone. That was kind of like the start of Tony Pollard figuring his way back out for fantasy football. Keaton Mitchell had 138 yards just on 9 touches. The rush defense can be exposed, and more than anything, I'm just getting a kind of a vibe feel that Philly needs this get-right game. We talked about it on the Patreon that we think both of these teams are going to be able to score. So I want pieces wherever I can get them. I'm sure you've been starting Swift these last few weeks, but I think he should once again be in your lineup. If he busts again this week where he's not able to reach double-digit fantasy points, then we could have a conversation about DeAndre Swift. But I think this matchup, the over-under is super high too. And overall, I think the Eagles offense just gets back on track.
Let me say this, because I understand where you're coming from, saying that if he doesn't play well against Seattle, then we can start having conversations. But Philadelphia still does have the easiest strength of schedule moving forward. So I feel as if he's kind of forcing his way into lineups because of how easy of a schedule it is. And we feel this way together, that Seattle is the best team that the Eagles are going to see the rest of the way. So I'm with you. He definitely was in contention for one of my starts of the week because, again, Seattle's rush defense hasn't been the greatest. But moving forward with how easy the Eagles schedule is, I still feel like I'm not going to be out on DeAndre, although he's been kind of disappointing recently. But for my start of the week, it's an obvious name. It's someone that just needs to be in fantasy lineups. If you're competing in daily fantasy lineups, Bijan Robinson going up against the Carolina Panthers, still one of the worst rush defenses in football. 3 of the last 4 weeks. Say that one more time.
Insane start of the week, Bijan Robinson. Got to keep you accountable. Nuts.
No, I understand that. But again, I had a feeling you would go DeAndre Swift. There really wasn't any other insane option. I mean, the number 1 running back of the week is going to be CMC versus Arizona. There's a strong chance that Breece Hall against Miami, just for the receiving upside, he definitely was in play for me. But Bijan, just the last 3 or 4 weeks, we're talking about a top 15 running back, was running back 20 versus the New York Jets. And even still, we saw him put up double-digit points, 4 weeks in a row of double-digit points. So for me, Bijan Robinson, he's going to be a top 3 back at worst, especially going up against the Carolina Panthers. I understand it's an obvious name, but why I say start of the week is because when you're doing your daily fantasy, you want players like this in your lineup to try and win. And Bijan was just the first name I saw. And Breece was definitely in contention, but you just never know. The Miami Dolphins have been really good against running backs. Breece has shown that his floor has been safer because of the receiving aspect, and Zach has been more willing to see the running back out of the backfield, which has been huge. So if you want, I'll happily pivot to a Breece Hall. Even though Miami has been top 10 against running backs, I think Breece Hall, because of how great he's been as a receiving back, has seen over 5 targets in multiple weeks in a row. Breece Hall can be a start of the week play for sure.
I'm laughing at DB in our comments saying, "Let me go pick up this Bijan guy real quick." I would recommend that.
Let's see. Is he not available in any league? 96% started. They know it's up.
There has to be some dead leagues out there. That's the only 4% I could think of. Moving on to running back sit though, I think this is a name that everyone's asking about. I was on Twitter today searching his name because I have a decision to make. Aaron Jones is my sit of the week. He feels like a trap this week to me. We have the A.J. Dillon news out there that he suffered a broken thumb this previous game against the Giants. He was able to play through it. Props to him. Although I was curious why in that third and fourth quarter we didn't see him as much. That's probably why. We saw Taylor on the field some. But Aaron Jones is likely going to play this week. If you go back to last week, I want to say Thursday, Friday, he was getting some limited practices, ultimately sat against the New York Giants. But I have 2 names in our main league. I'm starting Ty Chandler and Jerome Ford over Aaron Jones right now. I think that's kind of where I have Aaron Jones. He seems like a very risky running back 3 to me, and it's mostly because of the Green Bay Packers and kind of just historically how they've treated soft tissue injuries in the past. If you look at just this season, we don't even really need to go back that many years. If you look at just this season, Aaron Jones gets hurt week 1. He comes back week 4, plays 35% of snaps where he tweaks the injury again. He comes back week 7, plays 36% of snaps. So we're seeing Aaron Jones not even touching that 50% threshold, which throughout these last couple of seasons, of course, there's been other running backs there throughout the years, but he's always around that 50, 60, high end 70% of snaps. But when he's coming back from injury, the Packers are really careful with putting him back on the field. So if he's only be playing 30 to 40% of snaps, it feels like someone that feels obvious to start because A.J. Dillon is out. And if A.J. Dillon was out and Aaron Jones was 100%, it's probably the opposite. I'm putting Aaron Jones in my start of the week. But I feel like in a must-win week for basically everybody, now that we're in the playoffs, you have a bye, shout out to you. But if you're in the playoffs, I don't know if I could trust Aaron Jones this week. And going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the last few weeks, they have been a bit more susceptible on the ground than usual. A couple of weeks ago, JT and Zach Moss combined for over 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. We saw Hubbard, who was my sit of the week a couple of weeks ago, go for over 100 yards. But then last week, we saw them shut down Bijan Robinson, 10 carries for 34 yards to get into the end zone. But the fact that you're limiting Bijan to just 34 yards speaks more than anything else. And if you look back earlier this year, the first 3 months of the season, weeks 1 through 11 didn't allow a single rushing touchdown and just one 100-yard rusher. So I don't think they just forgot how to stop the run all of a sudden. I do think they, of course, let up those couple of big games to those running backs, but something in me just screams trap. And of course, Aaron Jones has the capability and the breakaway type speed to be able to just rip one and have a 30 or 40-yard touchdown. But the way he's been all season long, outside of a couple of weeks when he was kind of himself middle of the season, he's been disappointing. So I don't want to put him in my starting lineup when I need to win this week.
Unfortunately, Aaron Jones has been one of the bigger disappointments, and I feel like he's right next to an Austin Eckler, who at least Austin Eckler had given us some moments this season where he showed us his greatness. But Aaron Jones just been dealing with nagging injuries, a hamstring and then a knee injury. It's been an unfortunate season for Aaron Jones managers. So I understand where you're coming from. You're a man who's been dealing with some hurt and a little bit of abandonment issues, but it's not a great matchup versus the Buccaneers. But if he's going to play Vita Vea right now, his status right now is up in the air. We understand the dominant force that is Vita Vea when it comes to run stopping. But I feel like that'll make or break the difference between me feeling confident in Aaron Jones and not feeling confident in Aaron Jones.
If Vita's
If
out,
Vita,
or where, I guess more so starting him is one thing, but like who are you starting him over? Would you start him over a Jerome Ford, a Ty Chandler?
Starting Ty Chandler over him seems nuts. It seems and feels nuts. It does. Bengals have not been that great at stopping the run. I don't know, man. I feel like if I get the alert that Aaron Jones is ready to go and AJ Dillon's not playing, I'm playing Aaron Jones over a Ty Chandler. He's not bad. He's a good player, but I just feel you have to ride it out with Aaron Jones, especially because the Packers offense has been really good recently. We saw AJ Dillon while we haven't seen Aaron Jones on the field get a ton of carries. So obviously if AJ's not going to be playing, we're going to see Aaron Jones get a good amount of looks. If Vita's not on the field, dude, it'd be hard not to start Aaron Jones. But I get where you're coming from.
Even if, because I'm under the assumption that Aaron Jones is basically going to take over the AJ Dillon role, and Taylor's going to take over the Aaron Jones role, where I don't think Aaron Jones is playing more than 40% of snaps.
Yep. I get that.
That's where I stand. That's where I stand. But go ahead. Go on to your running back sit.
My sit of the week is going to be someone who's been pretty great, but of recent has not been, Mr. Ken Walker. Now, from weeks 8 through 10, he saw under 50% of snaps, got injured versus the Rams, then missed 2 weeks, came back against San Francisco, which I don't know if it was the smartest idea for him to come back against the juggernaut that is San Fran, but was running back 34 and didn't have double-digit fantasy points yet again. He had double-digit fantasy points against Washington, but then again, who hasn't when they've gone up against Washington? Going up against Philly, who right now... Can you hear me? Or did I crap
You're good.
out?
No, you're good. You're good.
Oh, okay, sweet. You froze up a little bit for me. But when you're going up against Philadelphia, who I understand they haven't been the greatest defense, but really we're talking about their secondary. Stopping the run, they're still number one in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs. They give up the fewest. And this matchup where Ken Walker just hasn't been doing it for me. And with the split backfield, they like to give the ball to Zach Charbonnet, who did not look too bad against San Francisco in his limited opportunity as well. I just would feel more comfortable going another route. And it's unfortunate because Ken Walker was so great when the season started. But once Zach came back from being injured, they really went with this 50-50 backfield. And I feel like it's messed up Ken Walker's feng shui. So for me, no way. I'm not having Ken Walker in my lineup.
You would start Aaron Jones over Ken Walker?
I would start Ty Chandler over Ken Walker.
Okay. So yeah, we're looking at him as like a, kind of back end RB3, most likely for Ken Walker.
For sure.
Moving on to wide receiver starts. I think you can like this one. I don't think we've named this player on our starts of the week all season long, but I'm going with Courtland Sutton. He's had a bounce back year after the injuries. And if we're just being honest, kind of poor play the last couple of seasons. Not entirely his fault. Last year, the offense was a mess. The year before, there was no quarterback there. But now you look up at the stats, and he's tied for second in touchdowns, 5 straight games of 50 or more receiving yards. He's Russ's favorite target. He's Russ's most reliable target. Jerry Jeudy has not had that breakout season that I know you and plenty of others were hoping for. But Courtland Sutton has been basically what he looked like pre-ACL injury, right? When he was in his early 20s, mid-20s, and he was probably priced as a top 15 to 20 wide receiver in dynasty leagues that looked like he was here for years to come. I mean, we've seen him time and time again this year be able to break off big plays, win down the field, win contested catches. And it's a juicy matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. The Lions allowed the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Look at the past couple of weeks. DJ Moore goes for 70 yards and a touchdown. You have Chris Olave have his best game of the season, going for 119 yards. And we saw even Christian Watson on Thanksgiving Day kind of have a resurgent there. Remember that first drive where he makes that big play down the stretch, and throughout the game, really all those receivers were able to find some success. And I mentioned on the Patreon, I think I even mentioned it a bit on the regular episode too, I think both offenses are going to be able to move the ball. I know the Broncos defense has been stingy lately, and Jared Goff in this offense has been turnover prone. But to me, the only way the Lions can win games is if they outscore the opponent. They're not going to be able to get a ton of stops. So even if they're able to get stops, I think the Broncos offense will be able to move with relative ease against the Detroit defense, which means that Jared Goff and company will have to answer. But regardless, I do think that Courtland Sutton is going to be a really good start this week. Probably one of my favorite wide receiver twos on the week.
as many touchdowns as he has, would you believe me if I told you he's only a top 20 receiver in fantasy football? Just doesn't have the yards to get him into that upper echelon of receivers. But when it comes to touchdowns, there's only been one player better, and that's the best wide receiver in fantasy football. So it's obviously been awesome to see him get into the end zone. And you're right, kind of get that fountain of youth back and be the guy who we thought that he could be back in 2019. But this would be a matchup that I would love for Jeudy to go and break out against. And last week it was against the Chargers, and he had so many opportunities to seize that, and he just didn't capture that moment. And so I'm with you. Courtland Sutton is definitely the safer of the two. If you're desperate, if you're in deeper leagues, I definitely would consider giving Jeudy a run because Detroit's been very, very kind to opposing offenses. So fire up your Denver Broncos. They should have themselves a pretty solid day. Now, my wide receiver start of the week is going to be someone who's kind of caught fire these last 2 weeks. 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, 3 of them coming up against the Dallas Cowboys. I'm talking about Mr. DK Metcalf. When you're going up against Philadelphia, it's going to be a wide receiver's dream because there's nobody that gives up more points to the wide receivers in fantasy football than the Philadelphia Eagles. And like I said, DK Metcalf's been on a little bit of a heater. And I think Geno Smith is going to play in this game. Didn't play in last game versus San Francisco, but he still was able to find the end zone. Had a little bit of an altercation with Fred Warner, got himself ejected from the game. But regardless of that fact, he's still been pretty great for fantasy football. Going up against the Eagles, there are very few plays I like more than DK this week. And the Seahawks are going to be playing for a playoff spot. They're in desperation mode. 4 straight losses. I think they're going to be playing with a little bit of fire, and DK is going to be the start of that. I anticipate him to be one of the best plays this week.
Yeah, I was also considering going with Tyler Lockett too, kind of as a wide receiver 2 flex type of start of the week. But yeah, DK should have a huge week. My wide receiver sit, it's going to be Hollywood Brown. Straight up, there's not a ton that goes into it. He hasn't been good this year. Whether it's injuries, he's been dealing with the heel. It's kind of strange that he played better without Kyler Murray. When you look at that first month of the season, you're looking at one of the more valuable wide receivers. He was pretty consistently putting up double-digit fantasy points. Then you know what happens. I go out there and trade for him, and now he's basically been unstartable. He's been better off. I would have been better off just dropping him, 7 weeks ago than rostering him all this time. Since week 10, which is when Kyler Murray came back, wide receiver 69, wide receiver 77, wide receiver 26. This past week, he had a goose egg, 0 points. He did get injured, only played around 53% of snaps, but that heel injury is something that has been dealing with, that he's been bothered with. He's still expected to play. They're coming off a bye as well, which he should be basically as healthy as he has been in those last few weeks. But going up against the San Francisco 49ers, I know if you look at just their pass defense and specifically looking at what wide receiver is able to do, they're able to have some success here. But this Cardinals offense scares me as a whole. I don't like starting James Conner this week. I do think that Kyler Murray is still fine, as we talked about earlier, just because of that rushing upside. But looking at Hollywood Brown, I know we're going to talk about another player later who's potentially going to be a sit. I don't like this matchup at all. These next 2 weeks, they got Chicago, they got Philly. Maybe we see Hollywood break out. But at this point, I mean, we're in the fantasy playoffs. If you're in an absolute pinch and you need to cut Hollywood, I'm probably okay cutting him. Let him be someone else's problem. I'm looking at, like I said, wide receiver 69, 77, 26, and 100. I thought about it. A couple weeks ago or last week going into Sunday when Hollywood's on his bye, I'm looking at my team and I'm deciding between Keaton Mitchell and Hollywood Brown who to cut. And my team is depleted of running backs. I need a running back desperately. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, who should I cut? Who should I cut? End up going with Keaton Mitchell. But I was that close to cutting Hollywood Brown. If he goes off this week, maybe then, of course, he survives another week. But if he has another game putting up 3 or 4 points, I go into next week, I need a new receiver, a new running back, whoever it might be. He's probably me the first player I'm looking at to cut.
It's tragic because we know how talented he is, and anticipating with Kyler's return, we thought that he was good. He was good to start the season with Josh Dobbs, and with Kyler coming back, hey, we thought the sky was the limit for him because we saw how great he was last year with Kyler. We anticipated the same this year. I just think that it's just Kyler hasn't been that same quarterback. And then on top of it, they just don't have that connection the way that we see someone like you mentioned, we could be talking about a little bit later in Trey McBride. But my wide receiver sit of the week is going to be the epitome of inconsistent, and that's going to be Calvin Ridley. Last 2 weeks, has not been a top 30 receiver. The weeks before that, we're talking about a top 12 wide receiver 1. So for me, Calvin Ridley has to be a sit of the week going up against Baltimore. Last 2 weeks, he's seen a plethora of targets, 9 and 13 in the last 2 weeks, and still was not able to put up double-digit fantasy points. You see the difference, the unfortunate difference, with and without a Christian Kirk early on, where it was Zay Jones who was the big missing piece for Calvin Ridley to get going. We see Zay Jones back into the field. This is when we see Calvin Ridley get his going. Now we have, unfortunately, Christian Kirk out for the rest of the regular season and potentially the rest of the season, unless the Jaguars make a deep postseason run. And now we're back to Calvin Ridley being a very mediocre fantasy option. So going up against Baltimore, who last week we saw Puka, we saw Cooper go up ahead and put some baller numbers. I don't know if I still can feel confident going out there and putting Calvin Ridley in my lineup. If you're desperate, if you're in deeper leagues, to me, the strongest he is a flex play because he's been close to double digits fair, 9.3 and 7.3 with insane amount of targets, right? You can assume that, hey, 13 targets, it's inevitable that he breaks one of those. But to me, it's just a matter of inconsistency and how safe a player is, especially at this point of the season. So if I'd rather play it safe than sorry, and I'd rather put better options than a Calvin Ridley right now.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, you have to take into account what this player has done, right? Your preconceived notions when draft season and early on, or if you traded for this guy, you have to throw it out the window. I mean, we have damn near a 4-month sample size at this point with Calvin Ridley. And the fact that he's getting targets, it's not like when he gets 7+ targets, he's a top 10 fantasy receiver. These last 2 weeks, he's had 21 targets and he's turned that into 8 catches for less than 90 yards. I mean, he's just someone that I'm not comfortable starting. So I'm with you there. Moving on to tight end, though, I'm saying the Flames with David Njoku. No matter the quarterback, the game script, who's in, who's out, Njoku is guaranteed to get work. If you go all the way back to week 4, he has just 1 game under 6 targets. I mean, you probably look at receivers. There's probably like Tyreek Hill and like Keenan Allen probably in that company. There's not even elite wide receivers who are guaranteed this type of workload. Last week, his best game of the season, 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. And it wasn't just 91 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he looked dominant. Like he was trucking people. He was giving people stiff arm. He looked really damn good. And the Bears defense, to their credit, has been pretty good against limiting opposing tight ends. Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, back-to-back weeks, both with disappointing games. But Njoku was too involved in this offense. Him and Joe Flacco, the first week with Flacco under center, the connection wasn't really there. But this past week, it was there. And Njoku coming off his best game of the season, I'm staying in the Flames there.
I'm with you there. Njoku has been one of the more under the radar great tight ends in this league for a couple seasons now. He's been an excellent blocker, but really has blossomed into a receiving tight end these last 2 years. And with Joe Flacco, like you mentioned, he's been getting it going. And last week specifically against the Jags, he was dominant. He was doing whatever he wanted, and he was very efficient with his touches. Obviously, got into the end zone twice. I love that play this week, no doubt. My start of the week is going to be Mr. Samuel Laporta. It's been a while since he's been talked about on our fantasy reaction show. He was a nice hot commodity to start the year. Kind of cooled off, but going up against my Denver Broncos, we ranked 31st in terms of points allowed to fantasy tight ends. And like Joel mentioned, he thinks it's going to be high scoring. I don't disagree too much. I think it's going to be big. Sammy Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. It's going to be a lot of them doing the damage to us because that's our weakness when it comes to playing defense. But Laporta's been awesome all season long, has not been as elite as he was early in the season, but still gets into the end zone, still the number 2 most reliable option for Jared Goff. And I anticipate going up against my Broncos, he should have himself a solid ball game.
Yeah, because we know PS2 can take away Amon-Ra St. Brown.
I don't know. I don't know about that. Amon-Ra is going to be
best corner in the league.
He's going to be moving around the field. He's going to be ducking PS2 smoke. He does. Believe it or not, he does, but I don't know if he's going to shadow this matchup. If he does, it's over for Amon. I mean, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. Moving on, though, to my tight end set of the week. I'm going to go with Dalton Schultz here. He's been one of the better tight end starts when he is healthy, but coming off He's missing back-to-back games with that hamstring injury. It seems unlikely at this point with CJ Stroud missing practice Wednesday and Thursday. That's going to be the Davis Mills show. So if you have a guy like maybe you picked up Isaiah Likely, for example, when Schultz was out, the Andrews news comes out, and you've been starting Isaiah Likely, I would stay there. My start of the week, David and Njoku, I'm there. Of course, Sam Laporta. So Dalton Schultz is probably kind of a bottom 15 type of play this week. The hamstring injury first game back scares me. What's the snap percentage going to look like? And then with Davis Mills, I mean, Nico Collins is going to be out. Of course, Tank Dell is already out. This is probably going to be one of the lower scoring teams just on the entire week with the quarterback play there. So I'd pivot off Dalton Schultz, find a tight end in a better matchup. Maybe a guy like Tyler Higbee, for example, who is probably pretty available across leagues. That Rams matchup, as we mentioned, going up against Commanders is very enticing.
My sit of the week's one that's going to hurt me. I've been trying to put bias aside for you guys because I care about your guys' fantasy success. I told you to sit Tua. I'm telling you now to go ahead and sit Mr. Trey McBride. Trey McBride has been awesome. Last time we saw him on the football field, he had almost 20 fantasy points. But going up against the San Francisco 49ers, a.k.a. will be covered by the best coverage linebacker in football, Mr. Fred Warner. It's not a matchup that I want to see if I am a Trey McBride manager. And like we've said earlier in the show, Kyler has taken a liking to Trey McBride. It's the guy he has a quick and obvious connection with since coming back this season. But going up against the Niners, going up against Fred Warner, who already are stingy to fantasy tight ends as a whole, I have to stay away from this matchup. There's just safer options. And Trey, who's been awesome, he's probably a guy that you picked up late and you felt like you hit the lottery with, because I'm in the similar boat. Trey McBride's been a dream for me, but in this matchup, I can't feel that confident because Fred Warner has dominated so many matchups like these.
Yeah, it's risky. McBride's been really damn good. I know that's your guy too, a little bit by association. I guess I'll
By
give Chuck the credit
association,
there.
I've
By
been
association.
grandfathered in. I've been
Facts.
grandfathered into the Trey McBride hype train. But do you want to get
Yeah.
into injuries before we get into questions?
Yes, sir. Let me go through these injuries real quick. So we have, of course, 3 Saturday games. So make sure you're checking your lineup Saturday, not Sunday this week. Few
Okay.
players who have already been ruled out. We have Alexander Madison, as we talked about, Ty Chandler a little bit before. Chandler's probably kind of a middle lean to back end RB2 this week. JT was ruled out. There's a chance he comes back next week, but not sure. Kenny Pickett and Greg Dulcich. Not that anyone was starting Dulcich. 2 players questionable. Josh Reynolds, Justin Jefferson is listed as questionable. He did say he was going to play. So that's the Saturday news. We'll do the positive first. So players who practice in full. Dalton Schultz, as I mentioned, with that hamstring is good to go. Trevor Lawrence with that ankle. Kyler Murray had picked up a thumb injury. I'm not sure exactly when that happened, but he's good. Josh Allen, Tyler Boyd kind of popped up late, but he's good. So no big news in terms of full. But the questionable list is mighty, mighty long. Players who were limited on Thursday. So we have Dalton Kincaid, who is dealing with the thumb and shoulder, likely to play. DJ Moore, Geno Smith, Raheem Mostert, Hollywood. All of these guys, Jerome Ford, Breece Hall, Travis Etienne. I think we're expecting most of these guys to start. I do think the only one that is interesting that I'm keeping an eye on in terms of players who were listed as limited on Thursday is going to be Demario Douglas from the New England Patriots. It's not a good matchup, but he's just been peppered with targets when he's on the field. He's almost a lock for like 5 for 50, 6 for 60. If you are in a deeper league dealing with injuries, whatever the case might be, if he's healthy as a desperation play, I don't hate it. Darren Waller was also activated off IR. Not 100% sure if he's going to play yet, but he's been out longer than that IR typical, 3-4 weeks is. He's been missing time for a while now. Noah Brown is kind of the de facto wide receiver 1 over there in Houston, also dealing with that knee injury, but expected to play. But let's get on to the players who did not practice. These are going to be tough. We have a pair of Houston Texans, CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. I'm under the impression neither of them play. Do you feel similar?
I do.
Okay. We have Chris Olave dealing with an ankle, Isaiah Pacheco with a shoulder, Brian Robinson with a hamstring, Ramondre Stevenson with an ankle, Achane with the toe, which I already feel like he's not going to play. Tyreek Hill, we talked about a little bit earlier. This Friday report is going to mean a lot for Tyreek Hill. Yeah. If he's able to get limited, I'm 90% sure he's playing. Even if he's a DNP again, he's probably 50-50. And again, with these Saturday games, we're not going to have the luxury of having the full slate Sunday, 1 o'clock. You might have to make some decisions on Saturday. Also talk about A.J. Dillon and that thumb, back-to-back days of DNPs, unlikely to play. Christian Watson, another person who is unlikely to play. So it's really these three that we need to monitor. Pacheco, I feel like it's going to be at least one more week. Ramondre Stevenson, I also feel like it's going to be one more week. But Brian Robinson and Chris Olave, I think those are the two names to monitor. The fact that they haven't practiced yet, I don't feel great about it. There's not really a pivot off Chris Olave, but of course, if Brian Robinson is out, Antonio Gibson gets a bump up in a nice matchup against the Rams.
Listen, Rashid Shaheed should be returning to the field. That could be a pivot there, especially because we know that Derek Carr loves throwing to him, and especially when it comes to the deep ball, you could get that type of upside where all it takes is 1-2 catches for Rashid Shaheed to have himself a solid fantasy ball game. That could be the pivot there, but I'm with you. You drop from Olave to Rashid Shaheed. That's pretty disappointing. Now let's just recap our starts and sits of Week 15 playoff time. So let's do it. My start of the week at the quarterback position is going to be Matthew Stafford versus the Commanders. Nobody gives up more points than the Commanders. Matthew Stafford's been on fire, 20-plus fantasy points in the last 3 weeks. That's a no-brainer for me. Running back start of the week, we're going Breece Hall versus the Miami Dolphins. 4 straight weeks of being targeted 5 or more times. He has just been racking in those targets and bringing in those catches. And that's what saves his floor for me. Going up against the Miami Dolphins, who've been pretty stingy to running backs, I think it'll allow him to have himself a pretty solid and successful fantasy day. My wide receiver start of the week is going to be DK Metcalf versus the Philadelphia Eagles, the worst defense when it comes to points allowed to fantasy wide receivers. DK Metcalf, last 2 weeks, 4 touchdowns combined. He's going to have himself an excellent day. My tight end start of the week has got to be that guy over there in Detroit versus my Broncos, Mr. Sammy Laporta.
Moving on to my starts, quarterback position, Sam Howell, 7 out of the last 8 weeks. He's been a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Now he gets a great matchup going up against the Los Angeles Rams. My running back start of the week, I think DeAndre Swift gets back on track. He was super hot to start the season, but this last month, just like the Eagles offense as a whole, has slowed down. But going up against the Seattle Seahawks, this defense has been susceptible on the ground. We saw Keaton Mitchell go for almost 140 yards just on 9 touches. We saw Pollard get into the end zone. We saw even Royce Freeman average more than 4 yards per carry. I like DeAndre Swift a lot this week. My wide receiver star of the week, first time all season long, Courtland Sutton. He's one of my favorite wide receiver twos. I'm not expecting this top 5 finish, but if he's someone you're deciding between him and some other flex plays, I think Courtland Sutton is going to be pretty safe. You know, he's top 2 in terms of receiving touchdowns on the year, 5 straight games of 50 or more receiving yards. So that baseline is pretty safe too. And he's Russ's favorite target in a game that I think the Broncos will be able to score in. And lastly, tight end. I'm staying in the fire with David Njoku. No matter the quarterback, game script, who's in, who's out, Njoku is guaranteed to get work. If you go back all the way to week 4, he has just 1 game under 6 targets, coming off the best game of the season with 91 yards and 2 touchdowns. Start David Njoku this week.
So let's get into our sits of week 15. My quarterback sit of the week, unfortunately, is going to be my brother in Christ, Tua Tagovailoa, going up against the New York Jets. Watching the game, he had himself a great ball game, but for fantasy football, under 8 points is not going to cut it. He's not a play that I like this week. Running back sit of the week is going to be Ken Walker versus the Philadelphia Eagles. It just hasn't been a great time for Ken Walker managers. Hasn't really been getting that much burn. Has seen under 50% of snaps in 4 of the last 5 games that he's played in full. It's just not a matchup, especially how great Philadelphia has been at stopping the run. Wide receiver sit of the week is going to be Calvin Ridley versus Baltimore. Calvin in the last 2 weeks has been targeted almost 20 times and even still has not been able to strike double-digit fantasy points in both of those weeks. So to me, Calvin's just been too inconsistent to have him start come playoff time. And my tight end sit of the week is a guy who's probably got you guys here on your late season push, Mr. Trey McBride, going up against the San Francisco 49ers. Trey has been awesome and has an obvious connection with Kyler, but Fred Warner's a scary dude, and I don't want anything to do with him.
Call me crazy, but I'm sitting Patrick Mahomes this week. I would start someone like Sam Howell over him. I would start Matthew Stafford over him. This past month, since week 8, Patrick Mahomes has just 1 finish within the top 10. This Chiefs offense as a whole has scored over 21 points just twice since week 6. They're not the same offense that we've seen in years past. Moving on to running back sits. Aaron Jones feels like a trap to me. I know that A.J. Dillon's going to be out. We're expecting him to get a bigger workload. But when you go back and look this season, when he came back from injury week 4, played 35% of snaps before unfortunately getting re-injured, and then came back again in week 7 and only played 36% of snaps. So if Aaron Jones isn't even going to touch 50% of snaps, he's not someone I'm looking forward to starting this week. At wide receiver, Hollywood Brown, he has not been good this year. Early in the season, first 6 weeks, he was decent as a wide receiver too. But somehow with Kyler Murray, he's gotten worse. Since week 10, Kyler's first game, wide receiver 69, wide receiver 77, wide receiver 26, and whatever the last wide receiver is in fantasy football, wide receiver 300 this past week because he gave you a goose egg, only played 50% of snaps. So I'm not excited to start Hollywood, especially going up against the 49ers. Lastly, tight end Dalton Schultz. You have Davis Mills most likely playing quarterback. You have him coming off a hamstring injury, his first game back. How many snaps is he going to play? He's going to be out there for 50% or 80%. It's not a game I'm willing to play.
All right, Mr. Dells, let's get into these questions, and then we'll wrap up our playoff episode. All right, first question from Azan Khan, excuse me. He said, start 2, DJ Moore, Gibbs, Devontae, and Breece Hall.
Those first 2.
It's almost impossible not to start DJ Moore and Gibbs going up against Denver. That's pretty great. I'm with you. I'm with you. All right. Shout out to Sean. He says Tua or Zach. It's got to be Tua. It's got to be Tua. I don't care what even if he's my sit of the week. DB too easy. Shout out to you. Show love every week, brother. Thank you. Which 2 do I start in my super flex and flex? Tua, Nick Mullins, Ty Chandler, Rashid Shaheed, Curtis Samuel. Don't like Tua versus the Jets with no Tyreek, but am I starting Mullins over him? Oh,
I'm starting Tua still. Starting Tua still. Yeah,
I would still start Tua.
We don't know about Tyreek yet. We don't know about Tyreek for sure.
And then for the flex, Rashid Shaheed's not a bad start. Are you leaning Ty Chandler over Rashid? I feel like that's
how much is Shaheed, like how much of a boost is he going to get if Olave is out? That's really what I'm curious about. Of course, he's coming off the injury too. He did have some weeks before that injury where he was playing around 50 to 60% of snaps. This is probably kind of, you have to look at your matchup. If you need some upside, you probably lean receiver. I might even lead Curtis Samuel in a really nice matchup against the Rams. I feel like his workload is more guaranteed. But if you need more of a safe baseline, I feel like Ty Chandler probably has the highest floor.
Yeah, Ty Chandler's floor, especially when it comes to playoffs, you need to play it safe. I'm fine with Ty Chandler. If it's a 2-week playoff and it's the second week of a playoff like we kind of do, maybe if you're in a deficit, I like what you said, Joel. I think Rashid Shaheed definitely has a higher ceiling because receivers, that's just naturally what they have. Emmanuel Brown asks, also with Nico Collins most likely out, do you guys like Curtis Samuel against the Rams, him or Jahan? I can't be asked this question, Joel. I'm gonna defer to you.
I'm going with Curtis Samuel over Jahan. He's been getting decent work. It's nothing that, like we talked about earlier in this episode, Terry McLaurin is barely wide receiver 3, and then you have Dotson. You have Dotson and Curtis Samuel outside of flex territory. They're wide receiver 4 bench type pieces. But Curtis Samuel just feels more involved week to week in the offense. I feel much more confident in him not laying a goose egg. Jahan Dotson, we've already seen a couple times this year do that.
It's been devastating, but I feel like Jahan's been kind of balling these last couple of weeks, but let me not take the bait. Let's just move on to the next question. Issa Mark says, yeah, I lost Herbo. Do I pick up Love, Russ, Goff, or Geno? What we thinking? I'll say this. If Geno's healthy, I lean Geno over all these guys, including Russ, who has an amazing matchup with Detroit himself. I think Geno versus Philadelphia, though, it should be all day, especially the last time we saw Geno against Dallas. He looked probably the best he's looked all season. I would lean a healthy Geno, but that's on Monday night. You probably would have to play it safe with Russ, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't even think Russ is that much of a downgrade from Geno either. I know that Cowboys game was sensational, but Russ going up against Detroit in the dome too, so weather control, not going to get any crazy weather. Who knows what Seattle's going to look like in December if there's rain, wind, whatever. So I would probably have Russ first on this list.
William Mann says, start Zeke versus KC or Puka versus Washington. You run to that app. You immediately take out Zeke if you have him in, and you immediately put in Puka Nacua. That's not even a question. Hydro924 says, Stafford, Murray, or Love? Stafford going up against Washington. That's my start of the week. That's an easy one for me. Zakwa says, should I start Amari Cooper or Dotson? Now, Amari is going up against Chicago, and they've been sneaky good defending the playing defense. You have to go Cooper. He's better. He's more consistent. But Dotson's upside's there. I see the vision with what this question's asking. This guy knows ball. All right. But yeah, you got to go Cooper.
If it was anyone not named Jahan Dotson who was like wide receiver 40, Mark Cooper just got 14 targets last week, 7 for 77. Yeah, I'll go with Amari there.
I'm with you. Rocco says Waddle, Olave, Hopkins start 2. I feel like Hopkins, you got to go Hopkins, especially with a banged up Texans team. And then Waddle versus the Jets and Olave, whose situation pretty up in the air. Waddle had over 100 yards receiving when he played against the Jets the last time. I don't know if we'll see a similar recipe of that this go round. Of course, Miami is the home team this time. I'm going to go Waddle. I'm going to go Hopkins.
Yeah, it's this question might get answered for you because Chris Olave is ruled out.
Correct.
I would feel more comfortable if Olave is playing than Jalen Waddle, like you mentioned.
I agree.
I know he had over 100 yards, but I don't know if I could count on that back-to-back times going up against that Jets secondary. So yeah, D-Hop is definitely in. I would have Olave over Waddle if he's healthy. Then if not, of course, the answer's there.
PJ Monroe says start Evans or Rashee Rice. This is tough because Rashee's been awesome. And if there's one thing that isn't the best about the Patriots, it's that the fact that they give up points to fantasy wide receivers. I don't know.
I'm starting Mike Evans.
I feel like you got it. He's
Evans.
safer. He is safer going up against the Packers. It's not a great matchup, but it's not a bad one. And I feel like Evans, although wasn't the greatest last week, I feel like you can anticipate that he'll get back on track.
The 2 weeks prior, he was wide receiver 2 overall, wide receiver 7 overall. If Rashee Rice had like a really juicy matchup, like he was going up against Washington, then this question would be a little bit more difficult. But the fact that he's going up against New England, I think they're tied for the second lowest over-under of the week. I think only the Panthers game has the lower over-under. So even Vegas isn't expecting a lot of points. I would go with your stud, start Mike Evans.
JDQ1310 says James Cook or Odell Beckham. This is tough. This is tough for the fact of James Cook going up against Dallas. They've actually allowed one of the fewest points to fantasy running backs. And Odell has been cooking recently, going up against the Jags secondary that isn't great. If it's a PPR league, James Cook is going to get you a good amount of points. He's been getting featured a lot in the passing game, and Josh Allen looks to him as a strong safety net. I feel like the floor is safer with a James Cook, who's really been on one these last few weeks. But I love both of these plays. I feel like whoever you decide, you can't go wrong. But I will answer, because that's my job. I'm going to go James Cook.
Yeah, I like the Odell play. I think that's a fine flex, but I love the James Cook play at flex. As you mentioned, Dallas's defense, they could do a good job at taking away running backs, but the way they've been utilizing James Cook, I mean, him on that wheel route feels like his signature route at this point in the season. Back-to-back games where he's having 57 receiving yards, and last week, 83 receiving yards. He's just too utilized in that offense. I would go with James Cook.
All right, let's answer a couple more. Raj asked Najee or D-Hop. Najee going up against the Colts. D-Hop going up against the Texans. I'm going with D-Hop.
Revenge game. Got to be, right?
Yep. JDQ also asked Kincaid or Likely. I'm going with Kincaid. He's just a safer play. I know Jaguars defense hasn't been great. I understand that. But Kincaid is one of the most featured guys in his offense. What do you think?
Yeah, I want to call you crazy for going with Isaiah Likely. He did have that big play, that big touchdown. He's a big play type machine. But we mentioned it right after Sunday or recorded Sunday, yeah. Right after that game, that Kincaid still ran second most routes on the team. Like he ran far more routes than Dawson Knox as well. So just because Knox was back, it didn't really impact his role as a receiver. He just didn't have the production. So I would still trust Kincaid this week.
Jet asks us Cortland Sutton or Zeke for the flex full PPR. I'm going to go Court.
Yep, I'm there. So, and it's not a good matchup for Zeke.
Do I like Amon-Ra this week? If I have CD, Cup, Puka, and Rice, I would still start Amon-Ra over Rice.
Yeah, those first three over Amon-Ra, but Amon-Ra over Rice.
All right, Mr. Dells, and that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show, episode 28. Fantasy Playoffs edition. We're going to be back here Sunday night to recap everything that happened in the fantasy world. We hope that your matchups go well. If you made it this far with us, we appreciate you. Drop a like on this video. It helps us out a ton. And if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notifications so you know when we go live like nights like tonight. Like I said, we'll be back on Sunday night, going live for the full podcast tomorrow night. And that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show. And we will see you guys next time.